Hello, today we're speaking with Philip Briscoe, COO at Rezatec. Welcome to the podcast, Philip.
Thank you, James.
At the start, could you tell us a little bit about Rezatec?
So Rezatec, we are really focused on the application of satellite data combined with lots of other data sets to help our customers kind of better manage their assets, whether they be natural or man-made assets, and giving them new insights, new accurate insights that really enable them to do that, based on the benefit of using, remote scale data.
And what are some examples of those assets?
So we work across quite a broad range of asset types. So I'm looking at things like natural assets. So we help kind of owner-operators of really large areas of forest, millions of hectares of forest. We help them look at the better manage the inventory, better manage kind of monitoring and disturbance events. We work with agriculture, so assets might be crops, or we work with owner-operators of really large-scale infrastructure, so things like dams, reservoirs, looking at pipeline networks, looking at really large kind of transmission networks for electric utilities, so a whole range of different types of assets.
And that monitoring, is it primarily to see, is the asset there as your client expects it to be, that you're looking for things like damage, or are there other elements?
It's more to do with actually managing risks. There's two main things we do. We're helping them look at risk, so increasingly look at using AI techniques to look at kind of predicting where things like likelihood of failure may occur, but also there's that observational element as well. So, what is that? Is there current evidence of infestation of spruce beetle, for example, in large areas of forest?
And in terms of the kind of, frequency of this data, are you checking this, these assets monthly? Is it less or more kind of frequent than that? And how does that impact those kind of risk models that your clients are using?
So the frequency of update, it really depends on the problem we're trying to solve. We can look at daily updates for something which requires real kind of near-term insights into change. But we might look at things monthly, because what you have to do is look at, the data that we're providing our customers, how quickly can they respond to that information? So say, for example, if we're monitoring motion on the structure of a dam, if we look at that monthly, what we're doing actually is looking at trends over time. So, we're cancelling out kind of changes that might be relevant associated with different, seasonal impacts. But what we're trying to do is identify trends over time. So if we build up a kind of monthly view of data, over time, we can start to identify when those trends are. So it really depends, I guess, is in answer to your question as to what type of problem we're trying to solve.
And in terms of the company itself, I believe you've been around 8 years. How different was the kind of early iterations of what Rezatec was trying to achieve versus, where you are now? Like, what was that kind of early MVP like?
That's an interesting question. So, I'd say pretty basic. When we started this, it was still in the kind of infancy of this new wave of, application of satellite data. There are a lot more satellites going up into orbit at that time. But really, we were kind of doing it on kind of piecemeal, almost on a consulting basis. We initially started to look at detecting the amount of carbon stock in forests. That's really where we started. But, quickly we decided to move into, perhaps more commercial areas and really started to productize then what we were doing. So initially, we probably write the code and never be able to use it again. Whereas now, we've moved to a far more productized, SaaS-based environment, actually. So you've got, reusability of your efforts.
And I suppose the typical client base, so that's shifted over the years as well. What were those kind of first users versus your current users look like?
First users, I guess we started off working in forestry. We've worked there for a very long time, but also with water utilities, looking at things like risk to water from pollution from things like pesticides. So we're looking at the kind of the identifying crops and then looking at the hydrological topographic flow of water, which therefore inform risk as to where you might see pollution based on runoff from a field of wheat or whatever, depending on when that pesticide is applied. So we started off looking at, I guess they were our first customers. We started to kind of build traction in that environment, and then we started to just kind of build out into what water companies in this case also needed. So started to look kind of not just upstream at the kind of raw water usage, but started to look further downstream them at looking at pipeline networks and risk associated with delivering the water. And in forestry, we've just really grown and grown and grown in terms of scale and the ability to serve with different sorts of challenge, help them to resolve different sorts of challenges. Initially, we were just looking at, identifying different species of tree. Now we're able to look at, whole great, forest inventories really at scale, and kind of monitoring them for all sorts of disturbance events.
And that client base, particularly on the forestry side, where are they based? Because I believe you're kind of based in the United Kingdom. Are most of your clients kind of local or European or global?
Most of our customers are actually in North America. So, we have customers all over the globe. So we started off working with a few UK companies, but very quickly we saw, market opportunity in other parts of the world, especially for forestry. There are huge forests in North America, and that's where most of our forestry customers are. Similarly with dams, in North America, there are, organizations that manage hundreds and hundreds of dams, so linking back to where the application of satellite data is kind of best, is most suited, is really when you're scaling across, sometimes remote large areas. So, places like North America fit that really well. But we also work in, Australia, Africa, Asia, all over the world, really.
And on the forestry, I was reading on your website, there's this mill optimization service that I found pretty fascinating. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So this is really about understanding what's in your wood basket, is the term. Understanding what species of trees you've got in a particular area of land that you're managing. What are the species? What height are they? What size are they? How near are they to the mills? So when you then look at your felling plan, and then you look at how you're going to maximize the usage of your mills, you want to be able to match all of those up. So you really need to understand the kind of supply going into your mills in order to optimize their usage. And also some mills, for example, may only be able to operate with certain size trees. So it's no good shipping in a load of trees which are, the wrong type of species for that mill to handle. Plus, if you want to operate, 100% optimization, you may decide to actually take 2 mills out for one season and just focus on 3 or 4 of them. So it's really about different ways of understanding what you've got in your forest in terms of your inventory, and then looking at things like, well, how near is that to the mill, because you want to reduce your haulage costs, and then how do you then optimize throughput in your mill?
That makes sense. And then thinking about, when you're speaking to your customers, because you're working across a number of different sectors, like what is, I suppose, the general pitch to those customers? You mentioned risk, but are you speaking to the kind of risk procurement teams at those companies? Is it some other group? And, what does that kind of go-to-market look like across these different industries?
So it does differ from market to market. But typically we are selling to and talking to kind of director level, senior level, budget holders who have responsibility for the operational part of the business. So, for example, with dams and reservoir management, we'll be talking to the head of safety or the head of dam engineering, and within their remit is the maintenance and operation of, say, 100 different dams. So whilst we're kind of the dam operators are the ones actually using the product, the pitch is really in at that kind of senior level, because there we're really helping them manage their resources, be far more efficient with the resources that they have, and also helping them de-risk, those assets. If you're running a dam, worst thing that can happen is the thing has a major failure, collapses, and all sorts of terrible things might happen. You do not want to have the best insights into what might be happening around that dam. You want to know what's happening well in advance. You want to be very proactive, and that's they're the sort of analytics that we're providing, and they're the sort of problems we're solving.
And you mentioned earlier that you kind of moved to kind of a SaaS kind of recurring kind of revenue model. Is that kind of based on a per asset basis, on a geographic basis? Does it vary by these different segments, or how does that the kind of monetization work? So,
without saying it depends for everything, but largely, sure, it can be around assets. So it could be a per dam. So if you're looking at 100 dams, the price will be based on how many dams you've got. Probably, tranches of dams that you might want us to manage. With forestry, it's probably more about area. More relevant to look at area than individual trees, for example. So it really depends. But what we are doing is offering to everyone a kind of subscription service, an annual subscription service, where they are getting regular updates of intelligence, essentially, to help them make decisions, and that's all through a hosted platform with all the analytics and all of the functionality you'd expect to see in a kind of SaaS tool.
And the AI that you're using itself, my understanding of building models, particularly with satellite imagery, is you need a fair amount of labeled data to start to build some of those models, and particularly because you have both dams, you have forestry, you have a lot of different types of assets. What's your general approach to kind of training your models? Adding new things that you can identify using these images, et cetera.
Yeah, so that's a very pertinent point. We do need training data to feed into our models. So some data is publicly available. So some data we can get from governments or national institutions. Some data we get from the clients. So a lot of times we'll get historic event or failure data from our clients and feed that into the model. Or sometimes we'll get, so if we're trying to train on a new forest, a tree species, we will find ways of getting hold of training data, sometimes through academic partnerships, sometimes through industry associations, or sometimes through the client. And so we are then passing that into the model. So a variety of different sources to get that kind of core training data.
And a couple of the companies I've kind of researched as part of this, this interview in the geospatial space will often use things like, on-the-ground sensors or IoT devices to help with like calibration and baselines. Is that something that you also look to use if it's available, or less so?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we look at things as a stack, really, and what we do is really top of that stack. We're kind of we're those eyes in the sky, if you like, in space, constantly monitoring what's going on and alerting to anomalies, essentially, or to change. But then you still need some other measurement and other sorts of techniques further down the stack, if you like. So if we have that data, we'll just feed that into the model and improve accuracy, precision. But it still complements perhaps folks going out on the ground and doing ground-based inspections, or where you might want to place your IoT devices or other sorts of tools. But helping to kind of target where you might want to station them, and also reduce the cost, because you would only need, say, if you're monitoring a large underground pipeline network, instead of blanketing that in devices, they're going to be measuring all sorts of things. We can focus on where the likelihood of failure is, and therefore you can just focus your capital expenditure on those those complementary tools in the right place.
And how much of the final data product has prescriptive versus descriptive elements? I suppose what I mean by that is, if there is elements that say, oh, this dam actually has the potential to fail, are you also kind of offering things around, and this is what you should now do, client X, or is it more, and that's where the client takes over and then uses your data to kind of figure out what the next steps are?
Yeah, so we are, Resotek, we are a product company, a software company, essentially. We're providing those analytics. We're not a consulting company. So we don't tell you what to do with the data. So either we work with our clients directly with that, or we'll work with strategic partners. So Black & Veatch, for example, is a partner of ours, or for dams, for example. So they have their own service offerings. And what we're really doing is providing a kind of new insights to help them deliver their assisting services. So it's a combination of, really, either we work directly with our customers, or we'll work with a third party strategic consultant, or sometimes more of a kind of bespoke water specialist in country, for example. So it really depends. But we're not, nor do we want to be a professional services organization.
Understood. That also impacts things like valuation, which is always definitely
indeed, yes.
concern. And actually, just because I just mentioned that, I suppose, what is the, I believe you're a VC-backed company, and I think you raised at the beginning of this year. What is the kind of general kind of investor kind of appetite for geospatial companies like yourselves been over the last few years?
So we've seen a lot of interest in geospatial analytics, but I think increasingly the driver is around helping combat challenges from climate change, which is definitely something that that our sorts of services can address. So we're seeing that as lead interest from potential investors in terms of what we deliver to our markets.
Yeah, and speaking to that, I don't know if you saw it, but as part of the new kind of Biden administration, they're adding climate risk metrics as a part of the SEC's remit, as part of a kind of a administration order starting in the next couple of months. And so I know in Europe, you generally had a lot more regulation around climate risk evaluation and analytics, but it's also now seems to be starting in the US. And so, there's potentially some kind of tailwinds for that kind of thing there as well.
Yeah, and increasingly we're seeing that in the markets that we work in, talking to our customers, it's becoming ever more important to be accountable And so, we will work with them to, further develop our applications to help fulfill, whether it be, regulatory reporting or whether it be different tools to help with, kind of environmental strategies.
And so with that kind of sustainability lens, do you have, let's say, models to kind of evaluate damage from, let's say the floodplain came up to point X and now it's X plus 1? I suppose your analytics go in that direction as well, or is that for more kind of specialized companies?
I think that's probably a bit more specialized than we're doing. We probably partner with an organization that was, providing that level of analysis. I mean, what we can do is, we can use all sorts of different data inputs in order to derive, risk profiles and to monitor and predict what might be happening now and in the future. But, going back to what I was saying, we're not consultants. I think if we were looking at providing kind of any sort of specialist interpretation of our analytics, we partner with an organization or work directly with our clients.
And you mentioned earlier that there has been this kind of major increase in, space as like a frontier for, new cheaper satellites, analytics. We're seeing announcements from SpaceX nearly on a daily basis. I suppose, where do you see the kind of future of the overall kind of growth of geospace applications?
I mean, I think just in the last 8 years since Rezatec's been around, initially we were having conversations where everybody was pretty excited to talk about satellites, but really had no idea about how they might be applicable or relevant to their businesses. Now I think it's certainly a long way from being a kind of commodity, but I think it's certainly far more respected and acknowledged that satellite data combined with other data sets and through interpretation of those data sets can provide real, fresh new insights that companies haven't had before. And as I said, they complement what they've been doing before, but it's really quite innovative and new. And in terms of where is the market, where's the most interest? I mean, defence still remains the biggest market sector and probably will do for a while to come. But actually, sectors or broad sectors like infrastructure, asset management in terms of managing large assets, I think there's a lot more increasing interest there. Environmental monitoring, in relation to what we were just talking about, and also looking at things like energy. Means supporting renewable energy drives as well. So I think there are certainly markets where we see a lot more opportunity.
So in terms of the energy, like what are the kind of applications that Rezatec has in that space?
So we can look at things like, working with electric utilities, for example, looking at ways of improving the way that they manage risk associated with kind of vegetation intrusion for transmission distribution lines, but really new ways of doing that, as opposed to, just having a kind of cycle-based approach where you send your team out, over a period of 5 years and monitor the entire network. Really using kind of smart ways of doing that with very regular updates of intel from satellites, across really large distribution lines, and helping utilities really focus on where to send their teams, where the risk is, where are those trees, where might they cause an outage based on their risk profile. So that sort of thing, but also looking at renewable energy, looking at sources of biomass. So, for example, looking at vegetation biomass, there's a lot of it around. Where might we be able to identify where there are sources of, biomass in order to, to harvest and feed into, different kind of biomass engines.
And that, again, mostly in North America, because I know there's been a lot of kind of growth in the kind of biomass and bioenergy space there over the last, let's say, 10 years.
Yes.
And then in terms of, let's say, those, one of the things that, as I talk to more and more people as part of the podcast, is the idea of kind of mitigation versus resilience. And this may not be kind of applicable to Rezatec specifically, so I'd love to kind of get your general views if not. But what are your kind of general thoughts on, moving infrastructure and moving systems to places that are less open to, climate impact? And so the classic example is moving kind of key municipal infrastructure from the coasts to inland. And that is a kind of a general approach. And also, I suppose, because you are seeing, this bird's eye view, are you starting to detect some elements of that from the ground up in terms of different companies making those moves?
I guess we're starting to see that a little bit, not in a major way. And also, we're not necessarily proactively looking for that. But I think, if you were to apply things like satellite data, analytics to this, this trend, what you can do is identify the best placed areas to move your infrastructure to. You can analyze all sorts of things from, underlying geology, soils, weather data, historic event data, to identify where might be the best place to resite your critical infrastructure, based on ever-changing climate change.
And thinking about, let's say, the industry as a whole, geoanalytics and geospatial analytics, what are the biggest kind of barriers to its growth as an industry? Is it talent? Is it capital? Is it government regulation? And are there any kind of government regulations that concern you?
I don't think there are government regulations that concern us. I think the general adoption of these sorts of techniques is increasing. So we are seeing more and more organizations very, very open and willing to adopt these sorts of new techniques into their portfolio of tools for mapping and measuring and identifying risk. In terms of major barriers, I mean, there are certainly not supply of data. There are increasing amounts of satellites going up into orbit and producing ever increasing amounts of data at really nice resolution and nice levels of frequency. I guess maybe in terms of computer processing and capability to manage a lot of that data. I mean, it's something you really need to think hard about. How are you going to manage all of that information? And I think possibly there's an opportunity for the industry at whole, or the data providers, to help solve that problem. And indeed, they're starting to by, you're not actually taking ownership or downloading the data itself, but you're kind of processing in the cloud, and the provider is actually accommodating for most of that kind of processing requirement. But I guess in terms of increasing amounts of data require increasing amounts of processing capability and associated services. But I think the market is responding to that. So I don't think it's a challenge that can't be very easily overcome.
And so that's interesting. So some of the data you're taking on, you're downloading it in some way rather than it being, let's say, piped via API directly into some sort of kind of infrastructure, whether it's AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. Sometimes you're actually having to do an interim step down locally, and then before you can get it into your kind of servers.
Yeah, there's still a lot of data is accessed that way, which can take quite a long time. It can slow down delivery times. So, but as I said, that is moving, but there are still challenges around actually physically grappling with the data.
And how much of the data you're using is kind of publicly available? I suppose the quote unquote free data coming from NASA versus kind of those kind of paid suppliers, the planet.coms and so of the world, or is it a combination of both?
It is a combination. I mean, really, we look at what data is best to solve the problem. But traditionally, we have been great users of the European Space Agency's Sentinel series of satellite data, especially Sentinel-1 and 2. So we use a lot of radar data, SAR data, which comes from Sentinel-2. And that's really nice resolution. It's really nice frequency. And a lot of our kind of ground motion, terrain motion risk tools use that quite nicely, actually. But then for some other for some of the solutions, we'll need to acquire, much higher resolution and therefore more costly commercial data. But we're very, very aware that whatever cost we put into the product has to be absorbed and then appears in the pricing. So we're always trying to find the most cost-effective way of delivering, the output that we want to.
And I've talked to a couple of smaller companies who've even thinking about launching their own satellites to measure very specific things. I was talking to one company who's looking to measure methane in a particular way with landfill, and the costs have come so far down for launching satellites that they were potentially able to do this at a Series A stage. How do you think about very specific satellites as for companies to actually launch themselves?
I mean, personally, for speaking on behalf of Resotek, we certainly have no plans at this time to enter the kind of upstream space, launching our own satellites,
Sure.
Or even sponsoring services with on existing satellites. I mean, there's a lot of data available to us. I don't think we're missing any data that we would need to kind of derive ourselves. So at this point, we're very focused as an organization on a kind of downstream application of satellite data. We call it geospatial AI. So it's really, applying, new AI techniques to existing data sets. And it's not just satellite data, it's incorporating lots and lots of other data sets as well into the mix, whether it be environmental data or asset data, just to improve levels of accuracy, levels of precision, scalability. That's really what's driving us.
And with the company, obviously 2020 has been a big, wild year for everybody. How has kind of Rezatec kind of gone through, in particular in the context of COVID, over the last, 6 to 8 months?
I mean, we've been quite lucky, I would say, James, because everything we do is cloud-based. So that's development through delivery. The customers that we have, the sectors that we serve, have still had to, do their jobs. They still had to monitor dams and forests and pipeline networks. So, we've been very fortunate in the sectors that we focus on and the way that we operate as a business. I mean, we've brought on board, probably 10 people during the kind of larger lockdown period since March. So, yeah, we've been fortunate in terms of a lot of other people's COVID experience.
No, it's great to hear. And, there's definitely, especially some of the, very high quality people who were laid off early, who were at, some advanced travel companies and so on, who got hit hardest earliest. I've heard from a few companies that there was just some amazing talent kind of on the market all of a sudden. So for companies that were less affected, they were able to kind of take advantage of that. And those people were not left unemployed too long.
Yeah. That's generally what we've heard as well.
Absolutely. And, thinking about, let's say, the companies base in the United Kingdom, what are your thoughts on the UK's potential as a hub for, advanced and kind of more advanced tech companies? And is there anything that the UK, from a, government, academic, or some other kind of way to support companies like yourselves?
I think we've been very fortunate in that we've been based out of Oxford. In fact, we're based in a place called Harwell, which is kind of science and technology, innovation park just south of Oxford. We've been recipient of a reasonable amount of, government funding, co-funded projects that have really helped us develop our products and our capabilities and really helped us through our journey over the last 8 years. The UK Space Agency, the European Space Agency have programs to really support companies like ours. Being at Harwell as well, Harwell's a bit of it's a space cluster. It's a bit of a kind of commercial centre for high-tech businesses, especially within the space sector. So it's been a really good place for us to grow. We started off 8 years ago with, 5 people in a small office, and now, we've got a brand new, really nice large office, and, we're about 60 people. So, it's really supported our journey. And as I said, it's a great base for our exports, our interactions with the rest of the world as well. And because Harwell is a kind of centre for space, excellence, a lot of organisations come to Harwell. So it's been really useful for us as well in terms of raising our profile and, really getting our foot on the ladder in the early days.
That's interesting. So, as part of COVID, a lot of people obviously moved remote as a matter of necessity, but there's a lot of kind of viewpoints out there that that may well be a kind of a permanent state of affairs. You can build companies where, your team is scattered across multiple locations, multiple countries even. How do you think about the trade-offs between that model versus, being in a sort of an ecosystem that is, in your case, kind of space specific? Silicon Valley obviously is the great big ecosystem of them all, but what do you think of those trade-offs?
Well, I think, I'd say to that everything's just moved into the virtual environment. Everything's just moved online. There's still the same ecosystem. It just now operates on the end of a Zoom call. That's really the change. I mean, there are obvious disadvantages of not physically being, in close proximity to people. But, I think everybody's ability to have almost seamlessly transitioned to a complete virtual environment has been fortuitous, but really not. I don't think it's upset those sorts of ecosystems too much.
Understood. And kind of thinking more about, I suppose, your kind of personal kind of journey to get this point. Let's say I was like a young person coming up in the world today, and they want to be the next generation analog to get to a similar place to where you are today. What advice would you give that person?
That's a good question. I think, look, you have to look to do something you're really going to enjoy as well and personally inspires you. A lot of people that come and work for Rezatec really like the context in which we work. Yes, we're a commercial organization, but actually the sectors we work in and the things that we're doing are supporting, more sustainability. They're, helping with all sorts of, challenges surrounding climate change, even with COVID. A lot of what we can do is help people work remotely as opposed to, or observe things remotely instead of having to be on the ground. So I think, you need to be inspired by, those companies that you wish to work for. I mean, there are certain areas certainly that we see where there are increasing demands for talent. So areas such as data science. I don't think anybody could go wrong with training to become a data scientist
Sure.
at the moment. And Earth observation science, I mean, obviously they're all relative to Rezatec. But, there's some really exciting things going on in the industry as a whole. And I think you've just got to look for, where you have an affiliation with the story that a company is projecting, and where there's opportunity, to grow and expand. And certainly, in this sector, there are a lot of companies that are growing quite quickly and, offering that kind of really great career route.
And in terms of your kind of journey, like to get to here, I believe you had a number of different roles in marketing. I suppose how did you kind of bring those to most impact your role today as COO at Resotek?
Well, I think when you're part of a startup that's 4 or 5 people and you're kind of wondering what you're going to do next, you have to wear many different hats. So along my journey, I've managed sales and marketing and product and partnerships, strategic partnerships. So you wear all these different hats as well as get great exposure into the technology as well from someone like myself who comes more from the commercial side of things. So you kind of, that's the benefit of being involved in a startup. You're kind of involved in everything. And then when you get to the sort of size that we're at now and the sort of transition that we're making, then that allows you then to, either be more focused or still be a generalist, but, at a more senior level.
Absolutely. And that kind of 25 to 50, 60% transition, I've been part of it at previous companies. And I often think it's like potentially tougher than getting from 0 to 1, getting to product market fit, because you have a fair amount of chaos. You used to be able to know that you could go to Susan and Bill for all your information around the technology, and now there's 20 people that nobody really knows that well. And so I suppose, how did you kind of cope as a company with that transition?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Yes, well, I think it's about having a purpose, getting everyone to buy into that, especially when when the company starts to transition. Suddenly there's a load more people, there's a load more work. As long as there's a kind of central core and central purpose that everyone can buy into, that makes it a lot easier. I think if there's very poor communication or nobody knows what the vision is anymore, then that makes it difficult. But also you need to focus on the right things. So, for us, it's about productization. It has been for a number of years now. We need to build repeatable, scalable products that can be reused again and again through our customers, whether they be in the US or the Philippines or in Spain. So, it's getting your product right in your product processes, but also in terms of your kind of sales and marketing effort. You really need to beef those up and really focus on really understanding what your customers want. Ultimately, it's about understanding customer value. If you don't do that, then you can have loads of interesting conversations, but you're not actually going to start growing your customer base and growing your your position in the market, which is really what we've been focused on doing over the last few years.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with all that. The old advice is always the best with startups, like just talk to users, build product that they want, and then just keep doing that. But it's quite easy to get distracted by everything else as you're a fast-growing company.
That's really true, yes. You have to not get distracted, however bright and shiny things may seem. You have to really focus on what you're good at, what you understand, and as you said, what your customers want. Because especially at the beginning, you're kind of chasing revenue and customers, and you're not quite sure, you're kind of throwing things and wondering what'll stick. But actually you need to, as you say, go back to basics, have a really core plan, core target customers, and stick to that and do it really well.
Absolutely. Just to finish up here, Philip, this has been great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything I should have asked you about but did not?
Yeah, I guess, what would you have done if you weren't at Rezatec pursuing a career in geospatial data analytics?
Yeah, absolutely.
The answer is, who knows, because, I don't have any kind of parallel dimensions that I've got visibility into. But I think I would have been a writer, actually, a writer of fiction. I think if I did anything again, I'd go back and do that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I actually I was on kind of academic track for philosophy. Did a master's up in St. Andrews, and then I was going to do a PhD up there, and then just started working a job in sales, and got permanently distracted. We'll say that, but there was a crossroads there. I could have been academic philosopher with the elbow pads. And so yeah, there's a world where you'd be up in the attic with a typewriter.
Yeah. Yes, those parallel dimensions, if only.
Very good. Well, great. Very appreciated. Thank you very much, Philip.
Thank you, James. My pleasure.